Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Righthand. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Marketing here at SCS Global Services, and I'm here to introduce today's webinar, The Benefits of Certification under SCS's updated Carbon Neutral Standard, SCS-108. Before I jump into everything, and I apologize that I'm not on camera, all of a sudden this morning my camera decided to stop working. But before I introduce our topic and our speakers, I want to give you a little bit of information about our webinar platform. Go to Webinar. In the upper right-hand corner, you will see a series of icons. If you click on the one with the question mark on it, at any time you have a question about the content that's being submitted that you would like us to answer at the end of the webinar, please just type it in there and say send your question, and we will take questions at the end of the presentation. And today's presentation is being recorded, and everyone will receive the recording tomorrow, and so don't worry about taking extensive notes or anything like that. We'll be sending you the recording. With that, let's dive in. I don't know if all of you are familiar with SCS Global Services, but we are a 40-year-old company, and we are an international leader in third-party sustainability certification, consulting, and standards development. We've done over 30,000 certifications in 125 countries around the world. We have many, many clients, over 15,000, and we have auditors in every major market. So these are the SCS companies. SCS Global Services, again, is certification, verification, and auditing. And we have joining us today from SCS Standards and Assurance Systems. We have now a new entity that is a separate legal entity that develops our standards and develops certifications standards, which we're presenting today, which is the revision of our carbon neutral standard. We also have a separate legal entity, which is SCS Consulting Services, and joining us also today from the Global Heat Reduction Initiative, that is where we are looking at superpollutants and all heat drivers with total climate accounting. And this is a very detail-oriented slide, but it's just got just a smattering of all the different certifications and areas that we work in on the global services side. So to introduce today's speakers, who are all pictured here on camera, Victoria Norman is the Executive Director of SCS Standards and Assurance Systems. Prachiti Niranjan is the Program Manager for Carbon Neutral over on the SCS Global Services side. Judy Jeong is a Technical Specialist with SCS Global Services, and Jennifer Norfolk is the Senior Director at the Global Heat Reduction Initiative. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Prachiti, who will take the first slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. All right, so with that intro, let's first discuss what is carbon neutral certification so that we're all on the same page. So we'll walk through these steps here. The first step is in defining the subject itself. So this subject can be a product, it can be a set of products, it can be an entity or a company, a building, a service. There's lots of options at that level. The next level, once that is decided, is if it's a product, is it going to be a cradle to gate or a cradle to grave certification? If it's an entity, is it going to include scope 1 and 2 only? Is it going to also include scope 3? And if yes, which of those 15 subcategories in scope 3? Once those two pieces are defined, those boundaries for the subject, then the next piece is what is going to be the 12-month certification period for that subject, during which time the certification will be valid. So that can be on a calendar year basis, a fiscal year basis, or any other continuous 12-month period. So once we have the subject defined, the inventory will need to be developed according to the boundaries and according to the specific criteria for that subject. So for a product, that could look like a product carbon footprint or a PCF, or for an entity level, it could look like a corporate greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Once that inventory is developed, we move to the inventory verification stage. So we will go to a third party to get that inventory verified and ensure that the inventory was done correctly, again, per the criteria for that subject. So now once these three prerequisite steps are completed, you're going to arrive at the certification team for 4, 5, and 6. So step 4 is an item called a Greenhouse Gas Management Plan, GHG Management Plan, and this is a written plan signed by senior leadership within your organization that really showcases your organization's commitment to ongoing sustainability initiatives to achieve real emissions reductions. So some elements in that plan include short and long-term emission reduction targets, how your company is going to implement those and realize those reductions, the rationale for selecting carbon removal projects, and key project details. So for first-time carbon neutral certifiers, that may sound like a lot. So SCS reviews this plans to ensure that all of these elements are sufficiently covered in the plan. And I will also note that this plan is something that is annually updated with each recurring recertification. And speaking of recertifications, step number 5 comes into picture for recertifications, which is a year-over-year reduction. So this can be shown on an absolute or an intensity basis. And this is again related to the fact that the certification, the carbon neutral certification, really wants to emphasize and encourage real emissions reductions and not simply a year after year reliance on the use of carbon credits. So this year-over-year reductions must be shown and evidence must be provided to the certification team for that. Once all those steps are done, the final step is to purchase and retire carbon credits once the total emissions to offset has been calculated. For products, we would need the sales data in order to arrive at this total. For entities, it would just be the total of the GHG inventory. And then you, the entity that's seeking certification, would go to the registry and purchase carbon credits in an amount sufficient to neutralize those emissions. And SCS again would review the evidence and documentation to show that sufficient credits have been retired. And then, of course, the certification package, including the logos and certificates, will be issued at that point. So it's important for everyone to just understand these key steps of carbon neutral certification so that when we highlight changes that have been done in the standard, you can sort of orient yourself for where these changes are relevant. And one final note before we proceed is some terminology specific to carbon neutral certification. An achievement claim is a certification referring to the past 12 months, so it's backward looking. And a commitment claim is a certification referring to the next forward looking 12 months. So just keep that in mind. Again, these will come up later on in the presentation. Okay, so now we've aligned on what is carbon neutral certification, who is certified. So I want to take a moment to recognize a few of the organizations that have certified their products and or company level as carbon neutral with SCS. I'm sure many of you recognize these logos and icons and potentially even own some of their carbon neutral products. These entities are top brands, industry leaders in their space, and many of them have not just certified once, but completed multiple rounds of certification year after year. So with that, I will pass it to Victoria to give us a little bit more background into the development of SCS 108.
Thank you so much, Karen, for the introduction and Prachiti for this overview. So as Prachiti mentioned, I'm going to give a brief overview of the revision process for this standard. SCS 108, also known as Carbon Neutral Certification or CN, we really like shortening things and creating acronyms, was originally released in December of 2021. And in October of 2024, we began the process to revise the standard in response, to be honest, to multiple market forces. Sorry. The first of those would be that PAS 2060 was being retired. So PAS 2060 is a standard that serves to quantify, reduce, and offset GHG emissions for organizations and products. And fundamentally, it underpinned the SCS Carbon Neutral Certification version 1. And with PAS 2060 essentially being replaced by ISO 14068, which is the ISO standard that provides principles, requirements, and guidance for achieving and demonstrating carbon neutrality, it became very urgent for us to update our carbon neutral standard to reflect that change in the landscape. A second factor is, as some of you are probably aware, the European Union has been working relentlessly on really impactful legislation to avoid greenwashing claims. Two of those are empowering consumers for the Green Transition Directive, which comes into effect next year, and then the Green Claims Directive, which is still in draft form, but very aligned with what's in empowering consumers. Both of these directives prompted us to make changes to the claims that we allow in our standard so that we are more transparent and more truthful about what it means to be carbon neutral. And then lastly, there have been changes to Amazon's climate pledge friendly product carbon certification policy. Amazon's climate pledge friendly program, which is also known as CPF, recognizes our carbon neutral certification, and we want our standard to remain aligned with Amazon's updated policy. So it became important for us to also include changes in our standard to align to that policy. For those of you who may not be familiar with the CPF program, in a nutshell, products that are cradle to grave carbon neutral certified can be badged as CPF on the Amazon marketplace. That means that those products will appear as having a sustainability feature. And in turn, the more eco-conscious consumers out there, most of us included most likely, use this filter and feature to make more sustainable purchases. So considering these three factors, as well as the need to integrate lessons learned from 4 years of auditing and comments received during the public consultation period, which took place in Q1 of this year, we finally published version 2 of the standard last month, and we're delighted to present it to you all today. So that said, I'm going to hand it back over to the SCS Global Services team with Judy, who's going to delve into the technical changes and the certification process. But I'm going to stay on for the remainder of the webinar. So if you have any questions about the revision process or anything that I mentioned, I'll be happy to respond to those then. On to you, Judy.
Thank you, Victoria, for providing all the background on the standard improvements. So the major key changes to version 2.0 are new requirement specifying how to evaluate year-over-year emission reduction, and new requirement to pre-purchase carbon credits for any commitment claim. And the new standard also requires consolidated criteria for carbon credit qualities, commonly for offsets and insetting credits. And to advance the CN application, the new standard suggests flexible scope and time bound for scope 3 inclusion, very specific allowable CN claims, and a possible connection with the global heat reduction assessment. Can we go to the next? Yes, the first key update is about year-over-year emission reduction. So the previous version required year-over-year reduction without any exception. However, SCS notices some circumstances like which results in unavoidable emission increasing, like during a business growth or sustainable transition period. Or extreme weather events can cause more material inputs for agricultural products. So the new standard allows a one-time exception in annual recertification process, but the new standard still requires that the next year comparison shall be done against the previous of the exception year, which is to secure a planned carbon reduction track. Next slide, please. So previously, clients were requested to purchase carbon credits only after the 1-year commitment period when annual production and emissions were known. However, the new version requires credit pre-purchasing at the beginning of the period of commitment and quarterly credit inventory to rectify the difference between purchased credits and actual emission. So this is a kind of significant update to reduce risk in commitment credibility by ensuring the credit purchase required for achievement claims. Also, this key update lessens the burden on achievement claim process by starting production data collection earlier and spreading credit purchases over the time. And the new standard also stresses to include the reasonable credit requirement in a CN record, even though the SCS standard requires to consider the double counting issue of credit as one of credit quality evaluation. Let me hand it over to Prachiti to cover more key changes.
Thanks, Judy. Hello again. So moving right along to cover these updates. This update is a requirement specific for carbon credits, and it's to ensure a high level of accountability for carbon markets. So carbon credits have to be tracked back to the original projects that led to the greenhouse gas reductions or removals. And if the original project can't be identified, that carbon credit can't be used in this certification. So I will note here that carbon credits can refer to both offsets or insets. Offsets are emission reductions or removals that occur outside a company's value chain, and insets are those that reductions or removals that occur within a company's value chain. So the full list of criteria that carbon credits must meet to be eligible for the certification is included in Appendix B of the standard, and it also includes principles of additionality, leakage, double counting, as Judy was just mentioning. So these rigorous standards make certain of the credibility and the environmental integrity of applying those carbon credits towards your carbon neutrality, towards your company's carbon neutrality claim, giving you more confidence in that claim. All right. This update is about time-bound requirements, and it's relevant specific to the entity level. So in SCS 108, companies have the option to certify as carbon neutral, only including scope 1 and 2 in the boundaries of their inventory. However, we found that some companies were limiting themselves only to scope 1 and 2 for an extended period and not expanding their inventory into scope 3. So with 75% of emissions in scope 3 on average, with some industries of upwards of 90% or more, we felt that this needed to be addressed with some stricter requirements. We included this, just as background, we included this as an option in the first place for companies to have carbon neutral accessible to them in spite of lack of resources or expertise or budget in the beginning of their certification process. And we obviously want to encourage companies to certify and make this commitment to reduce their carbon footprint, but we didn't want to do that at the cost of excluding the emissions where they are most material. So thus we have decided to implement a 2-year maximum for certifying as scope 1 and 2 only, after which time the company has to include scope 3. There's no change at the product level. Companies can still choose as cradle to gate or cradle to grave. But again, I do want to note that Amazon's CPF Climate Pledge Friendly program does require a full cradle to grave to be eligible for that badge. Okay, moving on to this update, which is relevant to allowable claims. This update has added in language specific to allowable claims for all of the defined subjects and scopes that can be certified as carbon neutral. To ensure compliance to market regulations, we removed the words carbon neutral from the actual claim language and instead drafted claims that are more descriptive and more transparent. So as an example, you'll see here in the quotes that company X or product Y has certified for having taken steps to reduce its carbon footprint and for having purchased and retired carbon credits in an amount sufficient to offset the remainder of its footprint. So again, this describes the exact actions that are being taken by the company, again, supporting that transparency. So at the bottom here, you will see that claims of achievement, and let's rewind back to whenever I was distinguishing between achievement and commitment are disallowed for products. So claims of achievement alone are disallowed for products. That's because if we remember, an achievement refers to the previous 12 months, so it's a backward-looking certification, and an on-product claim for carbon neutrality is a real-time claim that is occurring now. So that on-product claim for products has to be paired with a commitment to cover the current period that's occurring. So I think with that, I will pass it to Jennifer from Global Heat Reduction, who will walk us through that final change in the standard.
Thanks, Prachiti. As she said, I'm Jennifer Norfolk. I'm with the Global Heat Reduction Initiative, which is a long-running initiative in the background of SCS and recently became more formalized and is now a new option as part of the carbon neutral certification. This is an initiative to help folks not only understand their emissions, but also the heat impacts of those emissions. And it's based on groundbreaking science that is available on our website and also the latest IPCC reports. The focus of this assessment, which is optional in addition to the carbon neutral certification, focuses on understanding the heat reduction that goes along with the climate mitigation activities of your program. The real focus here is particularly on superpollutants, things like methane, refrigerants, black carbon, things that are responsible for half of global warming, but are really undervalued or sometimes even entirely overlooked, like black carbon, in your GHG inventories. And so this gives you a better understanding of what in your emission profile is creating heat, particularly in the near term. What's an additional piece of our analysis is that we're able to look at the different timelines of these emissions and where and when they are driving heat. And so for your company or your priorities, we can tell you whether in 5 years, 10 years, what kind of heat your emissions are putting out, and figuring out and using that as a tool to better prioritize what kind of mitigation actions you want to take, and also what kinds of offsets you want to buy. Whether you want to buy methane offsets or CO2 offsets, these are all different levers that work on different timelines, and our assessment will allow you to have that additional information. Additionally, this will allow you to make new claims that will help to differentiate you from your competitors in the marketplace. Now, with this new option, there's basically 3 different ways to engage with this assessment. Option A is the most simple, straightforward option. Basically, we take your existing GHG inventory, run it through our analysis, and that can be measured under the standard. Option B includes additional superpollutants, particularly black carbon, which is probably not in your existing inventory. And soon we'll be adding things like albedo, or otherwise known as Earth's reflectivity. If you have a large warehouse and put a cool roof in, for example, that would also have a cooling effect for the planet. Option C includes everything in option A and B, but also includes quantified co-benefits of the reductions. A lot of these superpollutants have a big impact on air quality and therefore health. And so if you have commitments around sustainable development goals, we can provide quantified claims around those figures as well. I will be around for the Q&A to answer any questions on those, and really excited to help all of our communities and stakeholders understand that this is not just about emissions, but about reducing heat in the atmosphere. So thank you all for your attention, and I'll pass it back to Judy.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'll now begin comparing SCS-108 standard to ISO standard, which will be the final section of this presentation. So ISO 14068 Part 1 was released in 2023 and one of the most representative standards related to carbon neutrality. So this ISO standard is a kind of framework setting out principles and requirements for how to achieve carbon neutrality. So we should recognize that SCS-108 is a certification standard, which focuses on verifying and certifying if carbon neutrality is practically implemented based on ISO standard. Next slide, please. So I will introduce key advantages of SCS-108 compared to ISO CN standard from left top box to the right. Once again, ISO standard explains CN principles, more focusing on how to achieve a CN goal rather than how to implement practically. So SCS specifies and differentiates commitment from achievement to enable clients to commit their future CN efforts and let them use the commitment claim for their marketing purpose. So after the commitment period, it certifies achievement claim too to guarantee client's commitment was performed. And in the second box, SCS provides logo and usage guidelines for the allowable claims so clients can use the logos for their websites and products during the valid periods. And the next three key advantages highlight practical requirements that makes participations more feasible, but still support the ultimate goal of carbon neutrality. So SCS standard specifies a flexible time bound of Scope 3 inclusion rather than requiring 100% of emission sources at some initial stages. And the standard also allows a one-time year-over-year reduction gap and accommodates business growth, as mentioned previously, as one of the key changes. Also, the new version requires the public disclosing of CN report as an option. So all those are to make to streamline more participations. And as shown in the last box, the standard expands the application scope of carbon neutrality certification by connecting it with the global heat reduction evaluation.
Awesome. Thank you, Judy. And thank you to all of the presenters that we had for this webinar. And thank you all for joining us and for your attention and interest in this topic. We really appreciate it. So we'll now open it up for questions and we can get right to it. Let me stop.
Great. We have a question here about, and I think this could be multiple responses. Will SCS Global Services perform the product carbon footprint and issue the certification, or must the product carbon footprint be performed by an external third-party consultant? Victoria, do you and Prachiti want to answer that one, or?
I can take a stab at it, and Prachiti, you can fill the gaps. From a standard development perspective, and as required in the standard, the three aspects, so the inventory, the verification of the inventory, and then the certification cannot be conducted by the same party for conflict of interest reasons. That said, you could have the inventory and the certification done by the same party if the verification is done by another party, or you could have the verification and the certification done jointly if the inventory is done by another party. So there's different options to kind of pick and choose from. And my understanding is that Global Services does offer all three services, but not all three services can be provided to the same client for conflict of interest reasons. But Prachiti, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that covers it.
Right. Okay, here's another question. I am currently certified. Will I lose my certification, or how long do I have to get recertified to the new version of the standard? Prachiti?
Yeah. So if you're currently certified, as we mentioned during the development process, the standard was released in 2021, and so we've had several entities and companies that have certified thus far, and we're in the process of those that have already certified with us explaining these changes and what process changes would affect them in their certification and recertifications going forward. So they have not lost their certification, and there is sort of this grace period that we have since it was just released last month. So we're sort of in this transition period of getting up to speed with the next version of the standard. So whenever their next round of recertification occurs, if that happens in October, then that's when they would have to be up to speed with version 2.0. If it happens at the calendar year, then that's when they would have to recertify according to 2.0, and they can sort of complete the certification cycle that they're already on.
Great. Thank you, Prachiti. Victoria, here's a question for you. Can you expand a bit further on how version 2 of SCS 108 aligns or complies with what's known so far about the two EU green claims directives? And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are concerned about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So considering that the Green Claims Directives is still a moving target because it's a draft document, so I do want to caveat any response with that. But it is aligned with what we have currently of the Green Claims Directive and empowering consumers, in that we have a third-party certification scheme that is managed and owned independently from those who are undergoing certifications, those that are doing the audits. So we kind of fit that definition. And then if we're thinking specifically about the term carbon neutral, because I know it's called out in those regulations, that kind of goes back to the slide that Prachiti presented on claims. Instead of just saying, you know, product or entity is carbon neutral, we're taking an approach of explaining what it means. And so it means having made efforts to reduce emissions and then offset any residual. So the idea really being to explain what it means rather than using the term, which is misunderstood or misleading in the marketplace in the EU according to those regulations. And then I would also add that the on product logo will not be able to be used in the EU. So that's also another way that we're aligning with the directives. And
Great.
I'm happy to continue this conversation offline. My life has revolved around these regulations, so happy to answer any other questions in more detail with the text under my eyes.
Right. All right. We've got a few more questions coming in.
Yeah, I see one, Karen, about 14068 and how it requires the carbon neutrality plan and annual report for carbon neutrality claims rather than an option. So just to clarify that point, I think we had as an option on our slides, and that was indicating that under SCS 108 version 2.0, it is an option to publicly disclose that GHG management plan and the report. It's not mandated, whereas in ISO 14068, this person is correctly stating that it is a requirement. So just making sure that we were clarifying that it's an option under SCS 108 and that it is not an option under 14068.
Okay, great. Thank you for picking that one up. There's another question just about pricing, and I can put on my former sales hat and just say that this is, I know she says, or the person said that it's a, you know, probably hard to say anything about it, but there are specific variables in pricing, and we would be happy to take this offline. For instance, are you doing an entity carbon neutral certification, or are you doing a product carbon neutral certification? Is the inventory already developed and you just need to verify that inventory and then produce the management plan and move forward with the offset purchase? Or you know, is you need the whole, you need to develop the inventory, verify the inventory, and then proceed with the certification. So there's so many variables that it would be really hard to put a number on it. But we are always willing to, you know, have a scoping call and, you know, throw around some estimates. So I would encourage anyone that's interested to engage with us, and we can, you know, take that offline.
Can I add something to that, Karen?
That would be great.
Yeah, I think by and large, if not every single time, I never want to say 100%, but 99.9% of the time, that purchase and retirement of the carbon credits is by far the largest investment in carbon neutrality. So if you are a large corporation with hundreds of thousands of metric tons of emissions, you do need to take that into account. I don't know what the running rate is for a ton of offset right now, but you will have to take that into account, and the certification cost pales in comparison to the cost for purchasing the actual carbon credits. So, and
That's a really good point. And
yeah,
Prachiti, I would also bring up that with the addition of the Global Heat Reduction Initiative, there's the opportunity to potentially buy credits that will carry more weight.
Yep.
And so that's a complex concept, but this is, methane packs so much more of a punch, as do refrigerants. So I think what we're going to see coming is, that all credits are not going to be equal. So I just want to put in some information about that. There's another question here about, is a company able to make actual statement that their product is carbon neutral through this certification or not? And that is the idea, that with a product, that you are given a logo and a claim and claim language that you are able to use on product, correct?
That is correct, except within the European Union.
The European Union is a different story, right?
Will not be able to be made, and that is specific to products because the regulations are specific to products. So on product claims in the EU will not be possible, and that's the only caveat.
Great.
Good questions.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Do we have any additional questions? I think we've pretty much covered it, but everyone will receive the recorded presentation, and certainly if you would like to reach out to get further information, we are always open to that. And I want to thank everyone for their attention to the topic today. We will be happy to take your inquiries, and thanks again. We will see you on the next webinar.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.